reached number 4 in our series entitled 66 Books, 66 short podcast where we take a biblical survey, a short overview of each and every book of the Bible. You are joining us today at episode 4, which looks at the book of Numbers, the book about the faithfulness of God. The book of Numbers. Numbers has been called by some in the past a sort of Pilgrim's Progress of the Bible, and in a sense it is a sort of handbook for pilgrims. However, the Hebrew title of the book is Bamidbar, which comes from the Hebrew word which simply means wilderness, or in the wilderness. The English title Numbers was given to the book by the early Greek translation simply because on 2 separate occasions in this book a census takes place. These occur in chapter 1 and again in chapter 26. The original Hebrew title In the Wilderness is probably more suitable, as the book covers the journey from Sinai to the borders of Canaan and much of the people's journey through the wilderness. The book itself claims that Moses wrote the book of Numbers. It tells us that within the text. Numbers chapter 33 verses 1 and 2 is an example of that. In fact, on more than 80 occasions this book says the Lord spoke to Moses. Other parts of the Old Testament also attribute the book to Moses. For example, in Ezra chapter 6. There are also several New Testament passages that cite events from Numbers and associate them or credit them to Moses. In addition to that, there's a common ancient tradition to Mosaic authorship of this book among both Jews and Samaritans, and indeed Christians of the early church. At the point where the book of Numbers opens, the people of Israel have been camped at Mount Sinai for about 1 year. During that time, God had been preparing them for the life ahead by instructing them in the kind of religions, the moral and social order he required of them as his covenant people. The time had come for the people to leave Sinai and head for the promised land of Canaan. The book of Numbers picks up where Leviticus left off. It records the last 19 days at Mount Sinai. It depicts Israel's journey from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, and traces Israel's journey across the various places in the wilderness, finally reaching the plain of Moab, across the river Jordan from Jericho. The book therefore covers a period of about 38 years and 9 months. The date is seen therefore to be approximately 40 years after the Exodus, so somewhere around 1407 BC. Genesis, Exodus and Leviticus, they were all written and all originally received by that Exodus generation. However, this is the first book of the Bible, the first book of the Pentateuch, for which that's not true, because at this point the Exodus generation had all died in the wilderness. Numbers was the book received by the first new generation that had not lived through the experiences described in it. The book therefore would stand as a reminder and a warning of what unbelief can do. The subject of the book is the faithfulness of God. In the book of Genesis, God was seen to have promised the land to Abraham and his seed. In Exodus, he redeemed Israel and instructed them. Leviticus continued and unpacked those instructions. The book of Numbers details the preparation for the journey and outlines certain regulations that the people had to follow, but also describes significant events that occur along the way. There is a sense in which Numbers was written to trace the history of Israel's wandering from Sinai to Moab, but there's obviously more to this book than that. The fact that there are really very little detailed records of the 38 years of wandering and the presence of so many laws and regulations actually goes to demonstrate that Numbers is in fact a very thematic history. One of the main purposes of Numbers is to teach about God's faithfulness. God is seen to be faithful to prepare the Exodus generation to enter the land. However, that generation is seen to fail. But finally, we see that the purpose of God will be fulfilled in how he takes things forward, whilst at the same time drawing attention, giving a warning, if you like, against unbelief. In attempting to summarize the whole book, we might say Moses wrote this book to the new generation to teach them that God faithfully prepared the Jewish people for entrance into the land, but drawing attention to the fact that because of unbelief they disobeyed him. Therefore God disciplined that disobedient generation, while at the same time remaining faithful to his covenant and preparing a new generation to inherit the land, ultimately showing that God is always faithful to fulfill all his promises.